Hi, everyone. Judge Andrew Napolitano here for Judging Freedom. Today is Wednesday, August 5th, 2026. Colonel Douglas Macgregor joins us now. Colonel, big picture before we bore in on the latest in the Middle East. Whatever happened to the greatest military in the world whose leadership boasted it could fight two wars at once and win both?
Well, that's a loaded question, Judge. I can tell you when I was serving in the War Plans Division of the Army Staff back in the 90s, this would have been 1994 to 1995. At that point, we were supposed to be able to fight these two wars, and they changed it from simultaneously to near simultaneously. We went back up and presented a study that we'd done that said we needed 563,000 soldiers in the United States Army, in the regular army, in order to fight these two near simultaneous conflicts. And we were told, well, you're not going to get those. You're only going to get 495,000.
Yeah.
So we said, well, if we don't have them on hand, it's going to be very difficult. Well, you have the National Guard. And we said, yeah, but it'll take 6 months to a year before the National Guard ramps up to the point where you can send them into action. We went through that during World War II and World War I. We're not going to be able to do that very well. They said, well, there's new technology coming, and that'll compensate for the lack of manpower. I guess what I'm trying to tell you is it was always a lie. We were never able to fight two wars near simultaneously, never. And so I think that's the first part of the question. Second part is what happened to the greatest that Trump talks about all the time. By the way, remember, he's also told us that he personally rebuilt it all during his first term, remember?
Right.
Which, of course, is complete and utter nonsense.
You were in the DOD for a while in his first term, am I right?
Yeah, and that was just complete nonsense. I think you simply have an example of a very large and expensive military establishment that over many, many years was reduced in size without making any accommodations with change that new technology, new forms of warfare required. And so it's a very wonderful, small but wonderful tribute to the armed forces of the Second World War and the Cold War. Nothing's changed. And it didn't really matter what we did in most cases when you were dealing with these smaller states where we chose to intervene. We were overwhelmingly powerful. There wasn't a great deal they could do about it. And I think they misjudged Iran. They thought they were dealing with another Iraq or Syria or Saudi Arabia or Libya, and they weren't. And they've gotten an education the hard way. And now, instead of recognizing the limits of our power and the prudent action that should be taken, which is to disengage and get out of this mess, I'm afraid we're doubling down on failure.
Does the Defense Department under Hegseth and the State Department under Rubio, as far as you can see, still view the United States as hegemonic, having total dominance wherever it wants it?
Unfortunately, I think they do now. Let me caveat that, or offer this caveat. They are aware that we are a large and powerful, historically hegemonic power since the end of the Second World War that is in decline. I think they recognize that. We were always struggling for dominance with the Soviet Union. But when the Soviet Union collapsed, we were the last man standing. Our allies had largely disarmed themselves, as you know. And so we were the only ones out there with any significant military power. And I think they became sort of inebriated with power. The results of Desert Storm led them to the conclusion there was no one else out there that could stand against us, and that this was a relatively permanent condition. So we didn't do our jobs, we didn't do our homework. Nietzsche once said that war makes the victor stupid. In other words, winning and winning decisively is almost worse than losing, because you learn nothing and you conclude that you're something you are not. And that's what we did when we embarked on this war with Iran. And I got into a polite disagreement with a friend the other day who was trying to say, well, that General Kane, he tried to talk to the president about the limits of air power and all this sort of thing. I said, wait a minute. Anyone with any sense at all, any professional depth would have said, this is the dumbest idea possible. Mr. President, don't do this. This will wreck your presidency. We will waste time, money, and resources on a campaign we don't need to fight that we can't win, at least not exclusively with air and missile power. But he was an airman, remember? And every airman privately believes that they can ultimately replace everyone in the Army, Navy, and Marine Corps, that all they need are airplanes and missiles, and they can do it all. So he wasn't about to say, no, I don't think we should do this. He may have said, we're going to have to, it's going to be tough, but we'll supply the target sets and see how this goes. It should never have started, Judge. It should never have occurred. And you saw this comment that I guess came out of CENTCOM headquarters. I think Larry was the first to, Larry Johnson was one of the first to break it, that, the CENTCOM commander was, and his J2, his intelligence officer, were looking for new, innovative ways to punish Iran.
There it is. Creative and unconventional ideas. Admiral Cooper sent that to more than 100,000 members of the military.
I mean, if this is not amateur hour on steroids, I don't know what is. Remember, this was not a war that was forced on us. We initiated this at Israel's, insistence, obviously, and the Israel lobby. There's no question about that. But nevertheless, we initiated it. And now we're saying, gosh, we've run out of ideas, guys. We don't have any more good targets. What do you think we should do? This is insane.
Colonel, is the war in Iran effectively over and lost, or is Trump going to extend it so that he has more time for a off-ramp?
I think there are two things happening, Judge. At least two main driving forces behind this mechanism. One is Israel and the Israel lobby and the people backing the Israel lobby who put Donald Trump into power with the expressed wish that he take on Iran and destroy it for Israel. Israel's hegemony, its supremacy in the region, cannot be established as long as there is a powerful Iranian state. They misled the president. They presented utter nonsense that he eagerly inhaled. And that's another story, but that's why we got into this to begin with. Now we're dealing with something else that I think affects probably President Trump and probably also President or Prime Minister Netanyahu. It's what I call the gambler's fallacy. If I can just roll one more time, I know I've won before, I can win again. I know this will work. And we are also watching as large numbers of aircraft are being sent back to the theater. And I think before long, we're going to find out that every B-52, every B-1, every B-2 is going to be loaded up with everything they can carry. And we are going to go after Iran with a vengeance in the belief that this time we'll get it right. Now, what most people don't understand is we've already done this for all intents and purposes. I listened to Mike Pence, the former vice president, say, well, we just need to take the gloves off of the armed forces. He doesn't know what the hell he's talking about. We've already done as much as we can do. But there is this belief, I think, in Trump's head that we can do more. And this time around, we'll get it right. The regime or the government, which I prefer to use, of Iran will collapse. The society will disintegrate. I don't agree with that, but I think that's where we are.
Doesn't the entire international community, diplomatic community, heads of state, recognize that Iran has stymied the U.S. and Israel and may actually be, and please correct me if you disagree, stronger today than it was a year ago, June of 25, when the bombing started?
I think the answer is yes. Now, when you say stronger than it was, I think it is more effective in its military power. because they have been resupplied and they have manufactured new weapons and equipment. They've refined their tactics. There's no question about that. They can defend themselves. And they've demonstrated that they can defend themselves at far less cost than anything we would spend. Because we're really not interested in defense. We're building an offensive force posture. It's designed to crush everybody anywhere, anytime that doesn't agree with us or doesn't want to go along with us. So, for a fraction of what we spend, the Russians, the Iranians, the Chinese have all built various forms of the military power that you've seen in action. And I think the world understands that. And that's going to remove us from the category of global hegemon. And if you listen to some of the retired generals, they aren't talking as much as they did originally about Israel, even though that's the driving force behind everything. They're now saying that if we don't win this, our position as the global hegemon is at risk. Well, no, they're wrong. It's over. Our hegemony is effectively ending. And they think this is a terrible thing, that if we can't control the world is a danger to us. I don't think the world needs to be controlled by us or anybody else, but that's the minority opinion.
Colonel, why should Iran negotiate with the United States? Isn't the core base of negotiation trust on the other side? And Iran obviously doesn't trust the United States. The MOU was ostentatiously signed on international television from the Palace of Versailles by the president himself. He violated it within 24 hours.
Yeah, and that's very unfortunate because you'll recall that I and several other people said when he signed that, and he made the comment, I don't intend to end up as Herbert Hoover and send the world into a global depression, that we all thought this was wonderful. Man gets it. He understands that we're not alone on planet Earth and that this has terrible consequences for the rest of the people that live here. And that was a great thing. And as you say, it was rapidly turned around. And that's why I say this war is not going to end. Now, why would the Iranians talk to us? First of all, the Iranian government is amenable, I think, to discussions if we want to have them, and we're serious. Right now, they don't see any evidence that we're serious. If you send back the dynamic duo, Kushner and Witkoff, they'll balk and say, "Don't be ridiculous." Maybe if you sent Rubio, they might take him seriously, at least initially, although he's certainly viewed as a puppet of the same lobby. I think they would like to see peace restored. I think they want to get back to doing business with the world. Remember, they did not start this war. And I know everybody says, well, they've been at war for us for 47 years. That's nonsense. If anything, I think we're the ones that have been at war with them for 47 years. I remember officers in 1980 talking about the fact that the Iranians were like the Bolsheviks and they had to be stopped because they'll want to expand. And then we began supporting this man, Saddam Hussein, whom you remember we tried subsequently to remove and eventually did. But we bankrolled him. He built up an enormous army. He inflicted 500, 750,000 casualties, several 100,000 dead on the Iranians, all in an attempt to do what we wanted him to do. So this business of who started what, I think is nonsense. So I think at this point, the population of Iran will not tolerate any serious negotiation. They've made that pretty clear. And yes, the population does have a voice in its government, contrary to what we say.
Colonel, this is a military and economics questions sort of put together. Is it true that the United States has seriously depleted its supply of needed military hardware to a dangerously low level? And is it also true that the United States has depleted its strategic petroleum reserves to a dangerously low level?
Yes. A good friend of mine. I guess we have the problem with the echo again, don't we, Chris? I don't know what happened.
All right, I can hear you clearly. Go ahead.
Okay. I'm getting an echo. Anyway, A good friend of mine who spent many years in the defense industry made a point the other day in an email to me. He was listening to everybody complain about the failure of the scientific industrial base to produce missiles and essentially meet the president's demands and demands of our military. He pointed something out that I think is very important that we don't mention. First of all, there's never been a declaration of war. Without a declaration of war, you can't arbitrarily mobilize the nation's industries. In other words, you can't do what we did in 1942 and essentially mobilize everyone to produce for military use. So you're stuck with assembly lines, if you will, manufacturing processes that are laborious, that take time. Building Jeeps and Sherman tanks is easy. Building complex missiles designed to be launched from aircraft or ships or on land at a great distance with precision, that's a much tougher problem. We're not up to it at this point. And frankly, it's because we went into this half-cocked believing we were dealing with another weak opponent. So the first thing is, yes, we've run through our stocks, and those stocks are dangerously low. Now, secondly, the petroleum issue. This is a big one these days. People are all saying, well, you said you were going to go into a crisis. Well, let me make some points here about petroleum.
Colonel, can I stop you right here?
Yes.
Because of the internet problems that we're getting. Could you log off and log right back on and we'll resume?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay. So these things happen periodically, as all of you know. We see that I'm not hearing the problem, but I see that you are, because you're telling me in the chats that you're sending to us. It shouldn't take Colonel too long to do this. We had the problem before we started. We thought it was cleared up. The Colonel's back with us now.
Is that an improvement?
Yes, it is.
Okay, good. Back on the petroleum issue. Right now, a barrel of oil coming off the ship in port is $140 a barrel. So that's considerably higher than the paper price on Wall Street. Yes, the strategic petroleum reserves are being run down, not just here, but all over the globe. We have halted any exports of fuel because we're going to need all of it here. We're that close to the edge. Our refineries have been operating at full capacity, but we can't afford to supply the whole world. It's just impossible. And of course, stupidly, we and the British and the Germans and French have provided the Ukrainians with long-range missiles and drones that are being used to strike the petroleum refining industry in Russia. I mean, it's just a very dumb idea. By the way, we're also buying Russian oil, so it makes you wonder what the hell we're thinking.
Yeah.
That's part of the issue. The other issue, though, is that economically and financially, our position is very fragile now. We haven't talked a lot about it, but in addition to oil, which is very important, and you're seeing the supply chains adjust and reorient. In other words, people are structuring for the future, which doesn't really include us. We're seen as a menace that's going to undermine or subvert the global structure, the global economic structure. That's one problem. Second problem is our currency. We just shipped, I don't know how many billions of euros from a euro slush fund somewhere inside our government that I'm not familiar with to boost the Japanese financial system, to essentially rescue the yen from destruction. Well, that's a temporary fix, Judge. It's not going to fix the problem in Japan, just as we can't fix many of the problems that we confront right now. Everything is temporary. Everything is a quick fix to get through the next quarter. And that's not going to work. And then finally, we have these people in the White House that surround President Trump and others on the Hill that I'm sure are part of this, who have benefited enormously from shorting oil through the series of ups and downs that President Trump has taken us in the oil markets. I think that too is coming to an end. I think we're not going to be able to manipulate the markets in the future the way we have to this point. Reality is going to strike home. And I don't know what that's going to do to the dollar, because the world, as we know, is increasingly de-dollarizing. And so I wonder about the entire system. And then finally, you have this strange phenomenon. On the one hand, you have interest rates that are rising, and at the same time, the bond yields are rising. Normally, when interest rates go up, bond yields go down, but they're not going down. And when you raise this, people are saying, "Oh, don't worry about that. That'll fix itself." Well, it's not fixing itself, and everybody knows once you hit that 5% mark on the 10-year bond yield, you're in a lot of trouble because you can't service the debt. And the servicing the debt's well over $1 trillion at this point.
Right. The debt will be 40 trillion before the end of President Trump's term. Colonel, is it true that the Iranians have severely damaged or totally destroyed 17 U.S. bases in the Gulf, and much of our assets have been moved to Israel over the complaint of Prime Minister Netanyahu?
I didn't know that he was complaining. That's interesting, because I would think he would welcome that, because they then become targets in Israel. And that promises to bind us ever more closely to Israel and his destiny. So I'm a little surprised at that. The answer is, of course, yes. Look, what has happened is very simple. The United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Kuwait, Qatar, all of these places, Saudi Arabia, they've all come to the same conclusion. We cannot protect them. And if your hegemonic military power proves unequal to the task of protecting them, then it's time for the hegemonic military power to get the hell out. And I think what they're going to do is tell us to go. And indeed, we should, because the longer we remain, the more often they become targets. And remember, Iran has made it crystal clear that if we resume the attacks on them and do the things that President Trump has threatened he will do with the weapons at hand, that they will annihilate, destroy, remove, whatever you want to use for a word, the remaining oil infrastructure in the Gulf region and Saudi Arabia. You have the Houthis that are now making life very, very interesting in the Red Sea for the Saudis. I see no end in sight for that. So the point is that things will not go back to normal whenever this ends. In fact, things will be much bleaker. The world will have to adapt to a very different world. And by the way, once it's made clear to us that we've got to get out, there's only one power on the planet left that can actually finance the restoration or rebuilding of all that infrastructure: China.
Right. Colonel, the president is facing serious losses in the Congress, probably the loss of the House and maybe the loss of the Senate in November. Do you fear a false flag, Colonel, to change public opinion on the war radically the way December 7th, 1941 and September 11th, 2001 did?
Well, I suppose it's not impossible, but I think that ammunition was used up in 2001. We tried to exploit 2001 to do exactly that. You can't treat the global war on terror, the massive interventions in Iraq and Syria, Africa, the Middle East, in isolation from 2001. I think that's exhausted. We have virtually evacuated Iraq. The bases there are being destroyed. The Kurds have told us, thank you very much, but we're not prepared to commit suicide on behalf of you and Israel. So I think that ammunition is exhausted. So I don't think that would work if it's tried. And I'm not saying that it couldn't be tried, but I just don't see that working.
Chris,
real quick. Everybody's worried about this midterms except Donald Trump. Now, why is Donald Trump not worried? Because of the enormous money behind him. Larry Wilkerson sent me an email this morning talking to me about the 140, 150 million in one particular pot designed to repeat the kind of action that was taken against Thomas Massey in Congress. Another pot of money of 750 million was designed to strengthen Israel's grip or the grip of the Israeli lobby and their billionaires on the Congress and legislation and the legislative process. This President Trump knows this. And with that kind of money behind him, he can protect himself against any attempt to remove him. And at this point, I think that's his only concern, that there would be an attempt to remove him from office after the midterms. And the other thing that we shouldn't lose sight of is we still think in terms of this dichotomy of Republicans versus Democrats. Judge, who are the Democrats? Who are they now?
Yeah.
Are they Democratic Socialists? Are they simply the party that is anti-white, the party that is anti-American in the sense that they'll come up to you and tell you, I have nothing in common with you. I don't care about the Declaration of Independence. I don't pay any attention to your Constitution. It's not me. I wasn't here. My ancestors weren't here. We don't care. I mean, that's one huge chunk of the Democratic Party. What about the Republican Party? Who are they? All they do is repeat ad nauseum Israeli talking points. People are tired of that. Who wants to hear it? Not very many people want to hear it. My age, you still have lots of boomers who just watch Fox News and think Jesse Waters is great and is his prophet. But the rest of the population, no, they don't. All you have to do is look at the polls. So I don't know what it means anymore. So I don't know what this business is like in the next congressional election.
I mean, look at those approval numbers. That's almost Nixonian. 63% disapprove, 35% approve. You're talking, of course, to an ex-Fox person. I spent much of my career there, but the most famous ex-Fox person is taking your advice, and tonight at 6:00 is interviewing, whatever you think of her, Marjorie Taylor Greene, about the beginnings of a third party. You and I have talked about this. We've talked about it privately and we've talked about it publicly, and it's been met with a lot of enthusiasm. That, I think, photo is an AI photo, but there are the people there, Tucker Carlson, Joe Kent, Thomas Massey, Marjorie Taylor Greene. So that conversation is out there. I don't think there's enough time to do that before 2028. Ask Bobby Kennedy what it's like to try and start a third party, but there certainly is the animus for it. I got to post another full screen to ask you if you've ever seen or heard of anything like this from a four-star, General Grinkowicz. Without another Navy destroyer, General Grinkowicz warned he may be forced to choose defense of the United States homeland over that of Israel. How could a four-star or a buck private possibly be conflicted about whether their job is to protect the United States first over another country?
Well, Grinkowicz has answered your question. Grinkowicz has said it very clearly. What we're doing in the Middle East has nothing to do with the United States and its core strategic interests. It's a lot of nonsense. I mean, you could listen to Laura Loomer and Levin and other people rant and rage and pour buckets of filth and abuse all over you because you simply don't think that what we're doing makes any sense for the American people. But I think most people in uniform are increasingly of that opinion. There's not much doubt. Grinkowicz is obviously speaking volumes. And this all goes back to the core problem, Judge. You brought in this man, General Kane, and I don't know him personally. Seems like a nice guy. But beyond that, he was obviously brought in. He was promoted because they were going to attack Iran. They wanted someone there who would say, yes, sir, it can be done. He was an airman. No one in the Air Force wants to admit for a second that air power is not the dominant force in the globe. In fact, the Air Force has been arguing for decades, you really don't need anybody else. We can do it all. So they got what they wanted. And people keep trying to say, well, General Kane, he did say there were limits to air power. Oh, come on, wake up, smell the coffee. Attacking Iran made no sense. We had no chance of subduing that country exclusively with air and missile power. Our sanctions failed. Our diplomacy, our diplomatic attempts to undermine, isolate Iran have failed. And we have created an alliance between Russia, Iran, and China. That alliance was identified by none other than Zbigniew Brzezinski back in the mid-90s. And he said that if that should emerge, that should arise, our position on the Eurasian continent was at serious risk. In other words, we can't prevail against that. And that's what's happened. That's why this war, which began on behalf of Israel to make sure that Israel was safe again and would be more than safe, would be the dominant power in the region, and that their interests of their friends in the United States would be well served in the financial markets. All of that has now had a terrible impact on us strategically, because in addition to identifying us as you started out with to some extent, as kind of a paper tiger after all this time, because we have the wrong instruments for the wrong war in the wrong place at the wrong time, we have now seen this alliance emerge. And this alliance is backed by hundreds of other states and organizations around the globe, all of whom are sick to death of us, are bullying through the financial system, through the IMF, through the World Bank, and want to see an end to this undesirable American financial and military hegemony. So that's
Colonel Macgregor, thank you for one of the best segments we've ever had. Long, interrupted by internet issues, but brilliant, articulate, and fearless as always, Colonel. Thank you.
Well, when I get off, I'm going to run that coffee down because I want some of
it. Okay. All the best. We'll see you next week. Thank you, Colonel.
Thanks. Bye-bye.